Can everyone hear me? That's better. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. I remind the gallery that tonight's meeting, local law requires that any member of the gallery must not interject or take part in councillor debate. Any person who is called to order may be requested to leave the auditorium. At tonight's meeting, in the interests of safety of the public, councillors and staff, Council is considering an item of urgent business to vary the process for public question time and for members of the public to speak to an agenda item. This new process will require members of the public to submit questions and comments online by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Members of the public who have submitted questions and comments online will not be able to address Council. The process will be that I will read out, where practical, specific questions asked by community members and a brief summary of any comments made on agenda items. Due to the time it would take to read out long submissions, it would be impractical for me to read out all of these comments at the meeting. I'll use my discretion in this matter. I will not be repeating questions or comments previously made. Questions or comments read out on behalf of a community member will be responded to or taken on notice at this meeting. Submissions will be made available on Council's website following the meeting. If you have not registered online and wish to ask a question or speak to a report for tonight's meeting, you may complete a blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. At the relevant part of the meeting, you'll then be called to address Council and you'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. And for safety reasons tonight, a microphone will not be provided for members of the public to speak. Please note that all Council meetings are live streamed to allow the community to watch and to listen in real time. In accordance with Council's local law, this meeting cannot be separately audio or videotaped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. And in the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden. So this is the first time we've sort of had this sort of meeting, so please you'll bear with us in terms of how we navigate all the questions. Now we'll just go straight to the agenda now. First up is item 1, which is apologies, and councillors, we're all here so we don't have any apologies. Item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, and councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 4th of March 2020 have been circulated. Are there any questions relating to those minutes? If not, can I have a motion to confirm these minutes? Councillor Bond to move, Councillor Baxter to second. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Third item is the declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? I'll note that I will have a declaration to make at item 12.1. Councillors, we have one item of urgent business, being a motion on council meeting processes, which affects public question time and public comment on agenda items. I would now like to move this item so that it's considered now. Can I please have a resolution to change the order of business? Councillor Pearl to move and Councillor Brand to second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay. I'm going to read it out. That Council, 1, notes that the Victorian Government has declared a state of emergency in Victoria to combat the spread of coronavirus disease known as COVID-19. 2, notes the Clause 11, Part 2 of the Council's Meeting Procedure Local Law 2, Part 2019 allows Council by resolution to alter the date, time and place of Council and planning meetings, committee meetings, and must provide reasonable notice of the changes to the public. 3, notes that Clause 68 of the Meeting Procedure Local Law 2/2019 states that where a situation has not been provided for in the local law, Council may determine the matter by resolution. 4, in the interests of the safety of the public and of councillors and staff, acknowledges that changes to processes are required and resolves that A, subject to availability and as determined by the CEO after consultation with the Mayor, until further notice, all future council and planning committee meetings will be held in either the Port Melbourne Town Hall Auditorium or the St Kilda Town Hall Auditorium. And B, the process for the public to have questions considered by Council or the Planning Committee during public question time to be varied until further notice as follows. 1, members of the public will be required to submit their question in writing by 4 p.m. on the day of the Council meeting. 2, any public question received will be read out by the Chair on behalf of the member of the public and either responded to or taken on notice at that meeting. Or 3, members of the public who have submitted a question will not be able to address the meeting. However, this variation to process will allow the question submitted to be considered during public question time without the need for the member of the public to attend the meeting. C, the process for the public to make statements or ask questions in relation to items on Council or Planning Committee agendas to be varied until further notice as follows. 1, members of the public will be required to submit their statement in writing on any item on the agenda by 4 p.m. on the day of the Council meeting. 2, any statement received will be read out by the Chair on behalf of the member of the public and either responded to or taken on notice at the meeting. And 3, members of the public who have submitted a statement or question will not be able to address the meeting. However, this variation to process will allow the statement to be considered when the relevant item is discussed, without the need for the member of the public to attend the meeting. And D, the above changes in process will be further reviewed by Council in the future as more information on COVID-19 is received. And 5, calls on the Minister for Local Government to urgently provide provisions that enable digital meetings of Council and associated committees. Do I have a mover? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter, second. I was the mover, and Councillor Baxter second. Councillor Gross, you have a question?
I do. Could we scroll back to look at section 4C2, where it says any statement read will be read out by the Chair? Can we talk about subject to your discretion, subject to the Chair's discretion?
I think we should change that because I would like to share the reading around. I'm going to be very dry at the end of this.
So, and also if they're, long and voluminous,
okay,
or
so
repetitive,
as the mover, I'm happy to... Any statement received will be read out by a councillor. Okay, any statement received will be read out by the Chair's discretion. By the Chair at their discretion. Might be the planning meeting. Yep. Pop your microphone on, Councillor Goss.
May I suggest, please, that we use the word may be read out by the Chair rather than will? Yeah.
Maybe, because it might be duplicated as well. So
yeah, there might be reasons why you want to shorten it or not read it out.
Okay.
Could be.
I think we just need to move a bit about the councillor. So, Councillor Baxter, do you agree with that? All right, so...
Sorry, Madam Mayor, just pending the exact wording change, I'll say okay, because I'm still not sure. The stuff we've said is a little bit different than what's up on the screen.
I couldn't hear you. Can you say that again?
Sorry, what is up on the screen is a little bit different than what we've said, so I will actually just retract my okay until I've clarified what's on the screen. So my understanding was that we were changing it to any statement received may be read out at the chair's discretion, rather than by the chair at the chair's discretion or a councillor. Does that reflect what you all just said?
I think we could take out by the chair. Thank you.
And we may even take out or a councillor because that's redundant by the time we've said it's at the chair's discretion.
No.
Yep, which was just done. So maybe read out at the chair's discretion on behalf. Yep, I think that's fine.
It will be subject to the chair's discussion. Just update that one. Gosh, I'm going to get whiplash. Okay, Councillor Baxter, happy with that one?
Yes, and are we proposing to duplicate that change of wording also for the planning committee meetings?
B2? Correct. For B2 to also duplicate that wording, please.
So if that's the case, then yes, I consent to that as well.
Would anyone like to speak to this item? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Now we'll move on to item 4, which is petitions and joint letters. And councillors, we have one joint letter on tonight's agenda, 4.1, Port Phillip Emergency Climate Action Network, and we've received... They're all statements. We've received 9 statements for tonight. Okay, councillors. So as I mentioned, there are 9 statements, and I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to pick bits and pieces out. I'm sorry, I've only just got this literally before the meeting started, and so I haven't had a chance to look at what's duplicated and what's not. So I have to... So bear with me, but as a result, these statements will go up on the website. First one from Trevor White. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. Unchain is a co-signatory to the joint letter and is keen to learn what Council has done over the last 27 weeks and what is planned for the remainder of this year and into the future. Is it possible for Council officers to prepare a response for the Pecan network and the wider Port Phillip community well before the next scheduled meeting planned for the 1st of April and have this response communicated to the community? Mr. Cassidy, just wondering if you would like to answer them as we go.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we can prepare a response in terms of the work that we have been doing to respond to climate change and what we're intending to do. There is some work that is still working its way through for the executive team to review, and so that may take slightly longer than the next council meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so probably the meeting after the next one, we'll have been able to do that analysis and prepare that report given priorities at the moment. And we understand it's an emergency, but it's probably the meeting after that one.
Okay,
Mayor, I'm just wondering, under the new procedure, am I able to put the motion? Can I put the motion? Can I put the motion for the item?
No, there are some submitters. I will be... I'm going to take that offline for 1 second, Councillor
Thank you.
Phillip.
Maybe if I could suggest an alternative, given we've got 30 people here who are putting their health and safety at risk, maybe we put the items where people haven't turned up to speak to the item last, and the people that are actually willing to speak, we put them more up the agenda.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as part of the process tonight and in the interest of public safety, we've encouraged people to ask questions online and attend online. And I think my advice would be that in fairness to those people who've taken that advice, that we should at least read a synopsis of their statements and take relevant questions on each item, and then take questions from members of the public who wish to ask a question in public. I understand the point that Councillor Pearl's making, but I think in fairness to many people who could have turned up tonight but took the advice to submit a question online, we should give equal credit to those questions.
All right. I'll be brief, and Mr. Cassidy won't need you, but we'll need you to respond afterwards. Mr. Justin Halliday, I'm here representing Port Phillip chapter of the Extinction Rebellion. We commend the City of Port Phillip for declaring climate emergency. We urge Council to follow through on its declarations by laying out concrete timeframes to implement Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands: tell the truth, inform all residents and businesses of the critical importance of tackling climate change, act now, commit to clear timelines and budgets to achieve net zero emissions, and 3, beyond politics, establish a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice to guide Council's actions. Peter Moriartis has said, despite the shock of the coronavirus, we should remain steadfast in tackling the climate emergency. We cannot ignore the climate emergency because we have another emergency. Okay. Bryn Jebson, given that the Council has declared a climate emergency, we urge the Council to consider how it engages with contractors and companies that work on fossil fuel projects. Currently, Council's procurement policy only requires the disclosure of any dealings with, support or provision of ancillary services or the funding of activities in the fossil fuel industry. However, including energy generation, distribution, exploration, etc., over a value of $1 million. In line with the declaration of the climate emergency, Council should strengthen the parameters of this policy to require disclosure of potential contractors' involvement with fossil fuels for all contracts by reducing or removing the procurement threshold. Rhonda Small. Community building is an important role of Council, especially in times of crisis, and we wholeheartedly support you in taking local leadership around climate action. You are our representatives. You took the bold step of declaring a climate emergency. Please now follow ways to draw on the resources of your community in shaping the actions. Communicate what has happened since last September. Partner with us. Set up a community advisory process and develop a budgeted plan of action on climate emergency that engages actively with your community. Bill O'Loughlin. I recommend that Council establish a climate emergency advisory and monitoring committee. The role of the committee would include advice on the development and implementation of Council's response to the climate emergency, monitoring the implementation of Council's climate emergency plan, and reporting to Council and the community on Council's response to the climate emergency. The committee would have to make recommendations to Council about all and any aspects of its response to the climate emergency. The committee should meet monthly and provide a comprehensive progress report to the Council every 6 months. Jack Halliday says, the sustainability area has not had any community advisory or consultative structures in place since 2013, and we welcome Council's intention to develop strong linkages with the community. PCAN's greatest concern is community emissions, which we now understand exceed 2 million tonnes of CO2 annually. Council's Sustainable City Community Action Plan is to be reviewed later this year, and we hope community input is sought in this process. And the program can be relaunched next year with more resourcing and more strategically developed objectives. Lynn Gunning, I want to commend Council on their proactive response to the climate crisis and their declaration of a climate emergency. By supporting practical grassroots initiatives and engaging with local community groups and proactive citizens to be part of the solution, Port Phillip Council will place the community first and can develop and implement a comprehensive plan that ensures we have smart solutions for a sustainable future. Judy Gunson, I'm a member of Port Phillip Extinction Rebellion, a local group formed in August 2019, but already numbers are close to 1,000 members from the Port Phillip community. We call on Council to establish a local consultative process to facilitate the creation of a citizens' assembly. This will empower citizens to take the lead and politicians to follow with less fear of political backlash. Citizen assemblies are fair and transparent. Assembly members have an equal chance of being heard. Briefing materials, experts and other presenters are vetted by diverse stakeholders and shared publicly. This produces informed decisions. Okay, so that's the end of the community submissions. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers on this item? Councillor Baxter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I know that obviously a response will come back once this is accepted. I know that one of the things asked for is a public meeting, and I understand that for obvious reasons we won't be making any recommendations for public meetings. But can I just suggest that in place of that, if we are wanting to communicate how we're doing things in the climate emergency, that we consider some sort of digital meeting or webinar that people can participate in.
Mr. Cassidy.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we will look at a number of online solutions to communicate and engage with the community about the work that we are doing around our climate change response during this period of state of emergency.
Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Pearl to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simic to second. Councillor don't wish to speak right now. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak?
Thank you, and I'd particularly like to thank the group who's brought this to us tonight for us to consider. It is really important and timely for us to be thinking about what a global catastrophe looks like, given what we're all facing right now. We know that the impacts of climate change are likely to be incredibly heightened and significant. So we really need to be, as a community, thinking ahead. One of the things that I've seen over the last few weeks is how so much weight always is placed on our economy and how well our economy is doing, but the balance between things working properly and things falling apart, I think all of us will agree now, is very tenuous. So when the climate emergency properly impacts all of our lives, the sort of impacts that we are looking at are significant and need to be thought about now. I am glad that Council has declared a climate emergency, and I thank Councillor Baxter and others who've done a lot of work pursuing this through Council. Our response is not perfect, but there are many of us on Council for whom this is a top priority and continues to be a top priority. And we know we're all going through difficult times right now, and people are considering what their personal response to COVID-19 is, but we also can't lose sight of the big picture, which is that our future also needs our attention. So I look forward to, again, revisiting this issue with our community. I think the people who are keeping this issue on the boil, and really encourage all councillors to support this tonight so that we can hear from our officers about the work that Council's been doing in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Baxter.
Look, just really quickly, as with any emergency, whether it be a climate emergency or the virus emergency that we've got, the really important thing is not just to take action, which I think we're doing, but to also communicate that action to the public. And so I think that if we're hearing from any groups that our emergency plans are not as clear to them as they would like, then I think it's reasonable for us to go, okay, well, how can we communicate this better? Because we are in both of the emergencies we're dealing with right now doing good things, but we just need to make sure that people understand what they are and what their role is.
Councillor Gross.
Hi, I've got a little PowerPoint. Okay, so I thought this was so important it deserved to have a bit of effort put into it. So I just wanted to share some views with those people who are concerned about the climate emergency. Next, please. I just wanted to say that it's about the change or augmenting our culture on this issue. One of the most important documents is the way we build our budget portfolio, and I was so grateful to see when the officers came to present it to us that they had all of that detail, and the third last line, the impact on sustainability targets and climate emergency, shows that in our most important budgetary document, our beloved officers have built the climate emergency into our consideration. You know, this is one of those moments where I really love our officers. Next, please. So all the significant expenditure is going to be assessed against the climate emergency. It's a major cultural shift. And some little examples. The climate emergency, you can see, say, with the energy efficiency and solar program, the water-sensitive urban design, their major positive impacts on the climate emergency. And then the not-so-good story is the public toilet implementation program will have nil impact on the climate emergency, but we do it for other reasons. And beach renourishment might have a possible negative effect. And I won't go through this, but here's a snapshot of some of the environmental achievements to be achieved by this year and next. So very extensive, very comprehensive. But the difficulty is communication. We're doing a lot, but how do we get that out there? So we have got our smart solutions for a sustainable future. We have sustainability websites. So if I could go back to the last one, sorry. For an overview of our strategy, and I'm going to be circulating this, here's our Sustainable Port Phillip strategy and newsletter. And here's our more formal corporate reporting on online. So here's just a couple of the things that we're doing. We've got the Balaclava Station tram stop upgrade. We've got Move, Connect, Live, which is our integrated transport strategy. The Murray Street bike lane are the first, I think, in Victoria, maybe in Australia, to try and deal with the problems of roundabouts and safety for bike riders. The central bike lane corridor for St Kilda Road with the state as a partner is important, and there was a death, as we might know, of a bike rider today, so this is super important. New bike lanes for Broadway in Elwood. We advocate for the Fisherman's Bend transport links. Here's a random woman at the South Melbourne market, you might recall. We have twin sustainability awards for our organic waste recycling. Act and Adapt, our sustainable environment strategy, which had a lot of community input. We have MREP, we're powered by 100% renewable electricity. We still use gas in addition to that, but our electricity is completely renewable because we sort of bought a wind farm. I'm really excited about what we're doing with water and skilling up. This is the Alma Park stormwater harvesting. And the South Melbourne market's powered by solar. You can see the solar battery array there. And Kirra Park, we created green open space, and that's not easy. So I know a lot of you are interested in trees. The Greening Port Phillip trees is going to be 5,000 trees by 2022, and we're doing a lot of de-paving, particularly around Port Melbourne. So I just wanted to do that presentation just to show people that this is at the centre of our culture at this council.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? Councillor Crawford.
I'll just be really quick. The thing that struck me at the meeting at Elwood at the Phoenix Theatre was the slide where it was pointed out that over half of our land is privately owned. And I just wanted to say, especially in these times with the COVID-19, I think we're all in it together. And yes, Council, we are here advocating for doing as much as we can, but it's up to all of us. And you in the room here today are probably the people already doing it, but perhaps your neighbours or someone else aren't. And so encourage them to plant trees and cool our city and do all the things that we are trying to do. I just wanted to reiterate, we're all in this together, and we are doing our best, and we will continue to look for those opportunities to improve. But it's not something that Council can do on our own, as same with getting through this pandemic. So thank you. Thank you for caring.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
Yep, that'd be great.
Sorry, before you close.
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to repeat thank you to those in the community who continue to bring this issue to the fore. It is urgent, and I'll look forward to the further discussions on this topic as well. Thanks for caring.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Pearl.
These are very important issues, but the City of Sydney just released a statement saying they're shutting their council meetings to the public. The City of Melbourne shut down its meeting last night and just talked about the pandemic that's going on in the Parliament of Victoria isn't allowing members of the community to watch Parliament proceedings. I would encourage There's nothing to do with the topic, and you can call me a point of order, but I encourage councillors tonight to be concise with the comments so we can hear the 30 people that have come here this evening instead of talking, waxing lyrics here about things that are already going to come back to council. This item is coming back to council. We don't need to talk about it. So let's let these 30 people speak so they can go home and be safe with their families, and let's us tonight be very concise.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Some of them are here for this item. We'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move to item 5, which is the sealing schedule, and we don't have any documents that require sealing. Item 6, which is public question time. And councillors, we have 6 people that have requested to ask a question. Most I have. In fact, all I have them all here. So I'm going to read them and ask for the organisation to answer them. First up is one from Sam McDonald. Why has the council allowed a Ferris wheel to be erected on St Kilda Beach during a pandemic when this is a time of discouraging tourism? Can the council justify this decision when this choice does not seem to prioritise the safety of local residents or the general public? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's a report later in the evening in response to our response to federal and state guidelines on mass gatherings. I'm assuming the Ferris wheel was approved prior to those guidelines coming out. It is outside. We are reviewing all outdoor events and events in the city in accordance with those guidelines. So I'll take, in terms of future action, I'll take that on notice until I get that review from my staff.
Thank you. And I'm assuming Mr McDonald will be made aware of the answer. Celine Lee questions, what are the council thoughts on curbside gardening? I'm lucky to have my own little garden plot, but given many residents live in apartments that have limited land space, I would like to know if it's possible to legalise curbside gardening. In the long term, there will be less resilience on supermarkets and vulnerable people will have access to produce. There are already several councils across Australia that have allowed this, and I was wondering if Port Phillip would consider this suggestion with urgency. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll take this on notice, but I will say that we do have verge planting guidelines, and we're currently working on additional community garden guidelines with council at the moment. And if there's any further information to respond to that question, we'll provide that to the member of the public who asked the question. Thank you.
Question from Judy Klepner. While the change to the meeting procedures is acknowledged and appreciated, why is the second item of business not an urgent item which outlines, even in the broadest terms, with any caveats acknowledging the volatility of times, how the council proposes to apply its disaster management plan to support the community, particularly those who are most vulnerable, to receive support services during the forthcoming period, including but not limited to lockdown? Limited information has only appeared on the website in recent hours after weeks of daily building concern does not begin to recognise what's going on in our midst in all settings. Council may have been having conversations internally and with other agencies, health, community and medical, but needs to communicate some of its work.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the agenda for this meeting was published, and obviously we were keen to get more information out to the public in relation to Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a very fast-moving situation. If the Mayor chooses, she can vary the agenda and bring that forward. I'm happy to answer any questions on that report tonight. I do acknowledge the need for increased public communication. Our priorities are twofold. Maintaining the health and well-being of the community in relation to our role alongside the state government, health authorities and federal guidelines, and also maintaining the safety and well-being of staff under my occupational health and safety responsibilities as CEO. The two are not unrelated. I need staff to be able to deliver essential services to the community and maintain those services and play our role in the Municipal Emergency Pandemic Subplan, which was well written and reviewed in August last year, but because of the fast-moving nature of this pandemic, we've had to regularly update that. So I'm happy to take questions later on when that report is tabled.
Second last question, Heath Martin. Following up from a recent planning meeting regarding the development of 21 to 23 William Street, Balaclava, I understand there is some consideration being given to the design and development overlay for the area. I watched a recent live stream where a similar question was asked, and I understand that a piece of work is being considered and possibly prioritised for consideration. This is very important given the recent sales activity on the street immediately following the planning meeting. Is there an update from Council?
Through you, Madam Mayor, again I'll provide a more full update from our planning staff. My understanding is that there's an option for Council in the budget, deliberations that they're currently having as to which of those planning reviews they undertake. So there'll be further details later in the year once Council have made those deliberations and prioritised that piece of work for Balaclava versus other priorities across the municipality.
The last question from Helen Halliday. In relation to street planting, she raises a question about how we're going to achieve our canopy cover targets when, for instance, the three streets, Gibbs Street, William Street and Nightingale Street, which were programmed for response this year, have not resulted in any new trees being planted to date. In fact, she would venture to say that apart from plantings in Chapel Street, there have not been any program response to tree planting in the Balaclava South area for years. Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor. With respect to the canopy cover question, we'll need to provide a more fulsome response on that at a later date. But with respect to Council's tree planting season is typically from April to August. I've been advised that the recently completed civil works in Gibbs Street will be planted out once the new season commences. The William Street and Nightingale Street projects are currently in the planning stages. I would add, though, that in the current situation, we will need to be looking at Council's resources, and so there may well be some reprioritisation that may need to go on, but that's certainly the plan at this point.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. That's it for public question time. Now we'll go to councillor question time. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Doesn't look like there's any. Good. So now we'll go to the presentation of reports. And pursuant to Council's meeting procedure local law, the CEO has requested, and I've given consent to, the adding of 2 late agenda items being COVID-19 related. These items will be considered at the end of the reports listed in the agenda. So I'll now move to the presentation of the reports, and we'll go first to item 12.1, which is the trial of Gasworks Arts Park for school use. And I'd also like to say that I, Councillor Bernadine Voss, declare that in relation to item 12.1, the trial of access to Gasworks Arts Park for school use, that I have an indirect conflict of interest by close association in this matter. I'd like to ask Deputy Mayor Councillor Baxter to come up here and to assume the chair for this item.
Excuse me for a moment, everyone. I'm just getting my head around the new setup. Okay, so we have received some requests from members of the public to speak to the item, some of which have been submitted online, and we have a couple of people who have requested to speak at the meeting. So, there. Okay. So the first statement is from Christine Fetterplace, who is a member of the Friends of Gasworks Arts Park, and the statement is that it says, "We believe that Council should not rush into a formal arrangement with Albert Park College for student use of the park. We consider that the process has not been sufficiently transparent or publicly discussed." There's quite a lot here, but I'll sort of see it. The questions that Ms. Fetterplace has: how was the area proposed for student use selected? And says that it is vague and unmanageable. Is there any limit proposed on the number of students in the park? What was the evidence provided to the Minister that student use will not be detrimental to the use and enjoyment by others? Who will enforce any conditions, and what are the penalties for non-compliance? What are the school's long-term plans in terms of student numbers and facility requirements? How is the continuous cross-park movement going to be managed? Why is there a need to dedicate a portion of the park for school use when the school grounds along Graham Street and at the Pickle Street campus are underutilised? And Ms. Fetterplace recommends strongly that a modified option 2 be considered by Council, that is, to grant APC a trial licence to use Lemnos Square for passive recreation during school hours and subject to appropriate conditions, facilitate an independently chaired community forum to discuss the potential use by APC and the potential impacts on the park with all stakeholders, local residents and the general community invited, and defer a decision to licence any part of Gasworks Arts Park until the forum has been held and the proposed public space strategy is available for public consideration. So that is my attempt to précis that.
So a councillor may take those.
Yeah, and of course, so that's a statement. So a councillor may take up those questions, and I hope they were noting them down as I was reading them out. So what's that, Councillor Brandt? I can't actually hear what you're saying, Councillor Brown.
It's not the sentence that requests a 3-month moratorium.
Oh, okay. I can't see that in here, but yes, there's also a statement from Kay Gibson as well. Ms Gibson expresses her dismay at the proposal to grant APC a licence over a significant part of the Gasworks Arts Park without having undertaken any meaningful consultation with the community of park users. In the interest of transparency and to keep faith with the park user community, Ms Gibson urges Council to defer the vote on granting the licence until it has undertaken meaningful community consultation to give park users a voice on this important matter. I can't see anything about a 3-month thing there, Councillor Brand, but that is the statement from Ms Gibson. So, yeah, we have 2 physical people in the room. So may I call Catherine Thompson to come up to the table up here. And Ms Thompson, as we've removed the microphones due to for health reasons, so if you could speak in a nice projecting loud voice and state your name and suburb for the record, please. Yes, thank you, Ms Thompson. Yes, it's been suggested to me by the CEO that I might sum up the speakers after they speak for the benefit of the people online who, if you don't have the microphone, so they can't hear. So essentially, so what I heard was a request to do some consultation over a 6-month period to partner this consultation with Gasworks, Arts Park and the users and to have a more strategic view as opposed to simply responding to a request, that we instead do a strategic assessment of the needs of different park users, including APC and others, and how we manage that. Is that a fair approximation of what you've said, Ms Thompson? That would be good if you could email that through. That would be great. Thank you. And a councillor may take up those questions. I now call on Jane Gray to come and address council. So, Ms Gray, if you could just state your name and suburb for the record. And yes, I understand that it's a bit trying to ask you to sort of yell out to us, but do your best. Ms Gray, I'll just point out that we're at 3 minutes, so if you could just come to the end. Thank you, Ms Gray. And again, for the benefit of those watching on the live stream, just to summarise that. So Ms Gray identified herself as a member of the Friends of Gasworks Park and felt that Council had not consulted Friends of Gasworks Park or herself well. They felt that there was a lack of transparency around the decision making here, called for a master planning process, and that we defer this decision until that and consultation has been done. Is that largely correct, Ms Gray? Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so I think that's all of the speakers and statements that that we've got. So I guess I'll ask the councillors if you have any questions for officers. I can see Councillor Simich's hand up.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Baxter. I've got two questions, if I may. My first question is around what community consultation took place in developing of this report.
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor. So there's been ongoing consultation around the dealing with the contamination at Gasworks Arts Park for a number of years. With regards to the challenge of the school use of Gasworks Arts Park, there's been discussions with the Friends of Gasworks Arts Park around those challenges, specifically with regards to the proposal that Council's considering tonight, the trial of a licence. There was some discussions that were held recently with the Friends group with regards to broader consultation. That's been identified as something that will be part of the trial and be considered at the end of the trial period to see whether the trial has been successful and whether it should continue.
And if I may follow up, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for that response. I'm looking at the timeline here that's been proposed. So enter into a licence agreement with conditions stipulated in this report, then develop council policy position on future school use of open space before the trial period concludes. So if council were of the mind to approve some licence in part or wholly tonight, would this period where council is developing the public space strategy and consulting on the policy development potentially be further community consultation that can take place on this issue? Would it amount to possibly further community consultation?
Mr Johnson.
Mr Deputy Mayor, as outlined in the report, the proposal is for a trial or a licence to be granted up until the end of this calendar year. As part of that process, we would call for community feedback on how the temporary licence is working, whether it's addressing some of the concerns that people have had about the use. At the same time, there is community consultation about to commence on Council's public space strategy. As the report also outlines, Council does receive requests like this with regards to school use of other private spaces or other public spaces, throughout the municipality. And there is a need to develop consistent policy in regards to this. As part of the development of that policy, we'd be considering the feedback that we receive through the trial licence period. Officers are open to, if Council would like us to engage more broadly with the community on the development of that policy.
I saw Councillor Crawford's hand up. Oh, Councillor Pearl?
Yeah, my question was, I think there was 3 people in the audience that wanted to ask a question. Just wanted to see if we had a complete list of people that wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, so I've been advised that that there were more people that wish to speak. So since we haven't entered debate, we can come back to them after we've finished councillor questions. So we'll come back. Councillor Crawford.
I've got a couple of questions. Is it not? My understanding is this is not. It's just trying to manage what already exists. So that's my first question. It's two. How many people are actually using the park at the time of day that the school is suggesting that they would use it? I don't imagine it's very crowded. So, do we have any idea of how many other people, on average, are using it? And the licence, just confirm for me, the licence doesn't exclude anyone else's use of the park, does it?
Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I'll start with the third question first. No, the licence the proposed licence does not grant exclusive use of that area to the school. Officers have received feedback, though, that the practical implications are that when there's a lot of school children, school students there at the park, that in essence dog walkers are displaced to other areas. That being said, the licence does not exclude that. With regards to timing, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me at the moment. We can provide that information. But as part of the trial, we will look at the number of students who are using the park, the number of dog walkers and other members of the public who are using the park, and whether those interactions are, there's specific timing issues that may address some of those interactions. And to your first question, as the report outlines, Council is unable to prohibit public use of Gasworks Arts Park. The school students are effectively using the park at the moment as members of the public, as all members of the public are able to do so. Council doesn't have any provisions to be able to manage that situation. There is a lot of conflict between the different users of the site, and so the reason why this trial licence is being proposed is predominantly to manage those issues. And in doing so, a trial licence enables us to place conditions on that licence that can help to manage some of those interactions.
Okay, councillors, so now that I actually have the list of the further community members who wish to speak, I'm proposing that we just suspend questions from the councillors for the moment. We will come back and just allow the community members to speak if everyone's okay with that. So I'll call on Oscar Pearce and Eloise Moses. Do you want to speak together or separately? One by one? Okay, so Oscar Pearce then. So if you could take a seat and, as I've said before, if you could project while speaking, a nice loud voice, and if you could just give your name and suburb for the record. Sure, Councillor Pearl would like to
Very
ask
quickly,
a question.
can you give me a summation of your understanding of the history of Lennox Square and why it's there, and how the school teaches that? I'm trying to determine the respect for the area. So what's Lennox Square all about, and did the school teach you that?
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Pearce, and thanks for keeping it to just over 3 minutes. I'll call on Eloise Moses. Apologies, I forgot to summarise Mr. Pearce's statements for those watching online. This is going to take some getting used to. Mr. Pearce is from one of the students at Albert Park College and talked about the small amount of time that students do spend there and how willing they are to share the park with others, and how understanding they are of how much of a special place it is. I think that's a reasonable summary. Ms. Moses, I'll ask you to again project and state your name and suburb for the record. Thank you, Ms. Moses McMahon, is that right? Yeah. Sorry for leaving the second part of the double-barrel name off. Again, to summarise for those watching, Ms. Moses McMahon spoke about the school lets other people use their facilities, and that you've been brought up in a culture of sharing everything that's great about this area, and that just as everyone else can use this public space, you're calling on the school to be able to do that as well, and you are a student from the school. Okay, thank you very much. I now call on Holly Pritchard to come and address council. And again, Ms. Pritchard, if you could state your name and suburb for the record, big and loud. Thank you, Ms Pritchard. Once again, to summarise for those online, APC is committed to equipping kids for the future. I say kids, obviously, some of them aren't little kids, and that teaching them respect is one of the most important things. You reiterated that 2 members of staff will be supervising the students being at Gasworks at all times under this arrangement, and that the students will be encouraged to react with positivity to the area, to protect the vegetation, adhere to the times, and that they have a lot of experience in loving dogs. I hope that's a reasonable approximation of your statement, and thank you so much. That is now the end of the members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillor Brand was the last councillor with his hand up, but he's now exited the chamber. Are there any other councillors who have any questions for the officers? Well, that's... okay, well, Councillor Gross, do you have a question or are you wanting to move?
I'm happy to move.
Okay. Okay, all right. So that's so Councillor Bond. I saw Councillor Bond first, who has an alternative recommendation. So I'll ask you to put that.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. You want me to read the whole lot or just the changes? We got them up there. The changes that Council 3.3 notes that any school access granted to public managed land should be non-exclusive or result in modifications to the existing landscape and infrastructure that serve the primary purpose of the public space. I think there's a little grammar there that needs some work. 3.4, add in the dot point, the licence stipulates that the public amenities within the Gasworks Theatre and Cafe complex are not to be utilised by the school. 3.5 notes that granting of the licence does not remove any usage rights currently enjoyed by dog walkers at Gasworks Arts Park, in particular their ability to walk dogs off leash. 3.6, I think stays as is, but just a number change. And 3.7 endorses a review to be undertaken following the end date of the licence that considers community feedback and takes into account views of community members in its assessment of the effectiveness of the trial and consideration of future licences in line with the school use policy.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. The CEO is just checking the wording of some of these just to make sure they reflect the true intent.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, can we just go back up to 3.3? I just want to check the intent of, should that say and not result in modifications? Is that correct, Councillor Bond? Is that what you're seeking? So I think 3.3 should say, should be non-exclusive and not.
I think the better wording is and not result in modification. And there's also further in there, just after the word infrastructure, I think the next word should be that rather than the. Oh, it has been fixed? Okay.
Through Ms. May, can you go to 3.7, please, Kirsty?
So, Councillor Bond, are you happy with what's on the screen? Yes. Okay. All right. So, Councillor has moved that alternative recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, firstly, like to address the point of councillors not responding. We've received 400 emails in the last 48 hours from various people with an interest in, I did count them all, and I did actually respond thanks to every single one of them, which took up a fair bit of my time, I can assure you. So yeah, apologies for not being able to respond with more than just thanks, but we were just overwhelmed with emails in the last 48 hours. The issue we're trying to address here is the school currently has use of the park unconditionally. This licence puts conditions on the use and gives council means to regulate behaviour in the park by the students if that needs to be done. I accept that there's some mistrust from some in the community based on past experiences. Most of it is probably unfounded in my opinion, but how people feel's up to them. I suspect the concerns with tonight's decision are born of past issues, and we all know what they are to do with the Gasworks Arts Park contamination. One of the changes I've made seeks to protect the amenity of the staff and visitors to Gasworks Theatre and Cafe, for whom this area is their workplace. I'm on the board of Gasworks Arts Incorporated, and to summarise the position, as I heard it from the other night's council meeting, they see the licence as a way of addressing some of the few small issues that they currently have with students from Albert Park College, so they're very supportive of a licence here, as they see this as a way to address some of the little things that they would like to see addressed. At the moment there's no means in place for them to do that, so therefore I will be moving this motion. I urge my fellow councillors to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
I understand that currently no licence is needed, that any citizen, old or young, with a dog or without, can enter that park. So I want to thank the school for trying to help us deal with the issues and make sure it's monitored and that everyone enjoys it. I'm a dog walker and I love dogs, and so that's why 3.5 is very important to this particular motion, because it means that one group doesn't enjoy access, which they're allowed to already, at the expense of another very important group. The other thing I just want to say is that my children played in a park not provided by the Education Department. When I went to senior school, I played in a park provided by the City of Melbourne. It's a very common phenomenon, a great part of being a member of the community. But it also does annoy me that the Education Department doesn't remunerate and compensate local government for the extra amount of maintenance that we'll have to spend. But that's a little frustration I'll have to go to my grave with. And finally, I just want to observe Albert Park College has been extraordinarily successful, and that means that we have a number of assets that they wish to share with us. Lagoon Reserve, South Melbourne Lifesaving Club and Gasworks Park stand out. And I think we need to get together with the school, recognise its huge success gives both opportunities and pressures, and try to work in a way that really maximises the outcomes for the whole community and taking into account APC. If I can just finish, when APC was closed down, there were 7 kids in Year 7. It was utterly non-viable, and now the reverse is the case. My kids used to play netball at APC. You know, there has to be this, and there will be this bilateral sharing of infrastructure. So this is quite an important night where we recognise the success of an institution in our midst and work to maximise the outcomes of everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Brand.
Yes, I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said, even though I agree with it. It does need to be emphasised that the current situation with school kids in the park is not something which we can stop. It is as of right, virtually. And so the idea of the trial is there hasn't, as far as I understand, and I've made inquiries into this, there has been no secret trial of Albert Park students in the park, or a secret agreement or anything like that. There have been, since children have been using the park, it's been a lot of inquiries have been made to state government and various other bodies, and legal inquiries and all sorts of things about the context of what's going on, which have contributed to the situation, the proposal we have now of how to construct a trial. And it really, a trial that is of a limited length and a very limited scope in terms of all of the things all of the limitations that are packed around it, is probably, I think, and I think this is the aim, it's probably the best way of doing a consultation on how this works. One of the letters that we received and read this evening did have a point in it at the end saying that in the meantime, Albert Park College should undertake to manage student activity in the park to minimise detrimental impacts. That has to happen anyway by agreement, and this is actually formalising that into saying to Albert Park College, how would you manage the children? What are all the things that you could pack around this, or that we would want you to pack around this to manage your students being in the park at these particular limited hours? Let's allow that, see how it goes. After that period, they won't be allowed to do it without further consent, and the further consent has to be based on an assessment of this as a trial, as a genuine trial. And you can see, I think this is the best way to go. You can see that we've several of us have had a go at adding modifications to the officer's recommendation, not because the officer's recommendation was particularly lacking, but we're all keen to insert in it certain things that we have heard from the community that they are particularly worried about, that it's the potential that it would water down the dog off leash provision, that they might have to sort of curtail that, or that it would change the landscape because of the children being there, that we would need to redesign the landscape to accommodate a school context. All of these things that we've heard from different conversations with the community, we've each packed into this, so there are more and more provisions that limit what's going to happen and actually define the scope of this trial. And that's what we're going to do. At the end of the year, when the trial finishes, we're going to be back to where we are now, but with an enormous amount more knowledge, a lot more experience, and a lot more actual experience rather than projected fear into the future. So I hope that is going to be, I hope that's recognised by the people who are disappointed by this, but a lot of their concerns have been built into this recommendation and into this trial, and it's probably the most practical way of getting a definitive idea of actually how it's going to work and how well it'll work and how badly it won't work. I'm supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Would any other councillors? Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My mother always says we all need to learn how to get along. And this is, I recognise for many people, a wicked problem. And unfortunately, we're going to have more and more wicked problems like this as our population grows and there's less and less space for us to recreate and do all of the things that are important to us. I recognise tonight that there are varying views on this topic, and I respect and understand all of the different views. I have also heard that there are people who are upset that they haven't received a reply from us yet from some of the councillors. And can I just say that since Monday, I've received about 350, maybe more, emails about this topic in my inbox alone. And I know that, for example, the Mayor's received even more to her inbox specifically. So it's been very difficult for us to get back to everyone, but we have looked at the emails. I'm sure I can speak on behalf of most councillors and taken into consideration, and are taking into consideration all the different views. I recognise what's been said already about recognising what the current use is and the need for us to implement we'll use this as an opportunity to implement some rules around the way that the space might be used. I recognise that for some people this doesn't go far enough, or perhaps doesn't take into consideration their point of view. I am concerned that some people feel like there hasn't been sufficient community consultation. For me personally, community consultation really has to be at the heart of everything that we do, and is incredibly important. But I am heartened by the fact that what we're doing tonight, if this is adopted, is essentially articulating rules around what already happens, but also giving time for community consultation to take place so that we can hear from the community and have a response to a practical trial that's being put into place. So while I know it won't make everyone happy, I will be supporting this motion tonight. But I do look forward to continued conversation with our community about how we resolve this issue and other issues going into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Pearl.
Agree with everything Councillor Bond says. I don't need to repeat what he said, but I would remind everybody the reason this is coming to a council meeting is because councillors wanted it to. This was originally not necessarily coming to a council meeting. We as a group thought it was very important that this was done in a transparent fashion, albeit I would have preferred not to have done it tonight. But thanks for coming along and speaking.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would any other councillors like to speak? If not, Councillor Bond, would you like to close? No closing? Then I will go ahead and put that motion. All those in favour? All against? That's carried unanimously. Let's bring the Mayor back in, and thank you all for having me.
Okay, now I'm going to go to the next item, which is 14.1, and then my intention is to jump to 14.6. So first of all, 14.1, which is the notice of intention to lease or commence the lease with South Melbourne Lifesaving Club. And I'd like to ask Dinah Boswell, welcome. We're all learning. Thank you, Ms. Boswell. Thank you, Mr. Boswell. Councillor Gross has a question for you.
Ms. Boswell, in 3.2 of the recommendation, it talks about 3 days. What happens? What would your reaction be to changing that to 5 days?
It doesn't matter what's in it. I really don't mind. The club doesn't mind as such, as long as we do have the option of who we rent to, and the prices are agreed with council leaders. We don't have that part of everything as well. That there be a suitable remuneration for that arrangement. Keeping in mind, at the moment, I've got ongoing bookings already for the rest of the year on certain days with certain groups, which are lifesaving related as well. So that would be possibly be a limiting factor, but I'm saying we could work through those as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boswell. Just to summarise, so you've queried 5 years instead of 21 years, as DWELP has recommended, 21 years. You have queried having to ask permission to rent out your community room, and you would prefer a looser agreement, or you to have control of that. And you have queried the terminology up to versus max of 3 days by Albert Park College, and you have queried the requirement to maintain the external part of the building. Thank you. So councillors may take up that question. Thank you very much, Ms. Boswell. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford?
Well, I will take up some of those questions. So I don't remember 21 years ever being mentioned at any point, so I guess I'm be interested to know, was that mentioned to us? And I may have forgotten that. And again, I need clarification. I thought we had agreed to only up to 3 days, and again, I could be wrong as whether that was something that we as a council had agreed to go forward in the negotiations. And what was the third question? Exterior maintenance, is that correct? And what was the other question that Ms. Boswell asked?
Permission to rent out the community room.
Oh, and
without a permit.
I vaguely remember that we thought that there was one permit you could get to apply for all of those things. So if you could clarify about the individual permits too, please.
Thanks, Mr. Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll try my best, but unfortunately, from where I've been viewing, you can't hear the community speak, and I know you've tried to summarise that for me, but what I can say in terms of the 5 years versus 21 years, the 5 years has been a consistent position from council officers and from council. It was initially agreed and more recently has been sought to be changed. We don't see any rationale or need for us to change it. It's not that we don't see the Lifesaving Club being a long-term tenant there, but for reasons as outlined in our report and also in the previous report and also in our property policy, we believe a 5-year term for this kind of thing is sufficient. In terms of the up to 3 days or a max of 3 days, again, average of 3 days. Again, I think we did traverse these issues. I haven't been involved in the most recent negotiations, so I can't comment too deeply on it. I'll have to take it on notice, some of those other questions.
And the external maintenance requests that the club is not responsible for the external maintenance, given that a lot of it is public.
I'll have to take that on notice through you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any further questions for the officers? Councillor Bond, sorry, I couldn't see you behind there.
Ms Boswell raised the point where the Lifesaving Club need to get permission from council every time they rent the building out for an event or an evening such as a wedding or 21st or whatever the case may be. I believe I've found in the officer's report what may have led Ms Boswell to have that belief, 5.71. And the third dot point at 5.71 says subletting opportunities subject to prior consent from council to ensure the building's primary use remains focused on life-saving and associated activities. Just to clarify, subletting opportunities, that wouldn't include bookings for weddings, 21sts, one-off events, but more so that would be, for example, if they wish to have rented out Albert Park College, or someone wanted to set up a regular yoga studio or spin class or something like that, they would be considered subletting, not just the one-off birthday party, kids' party events.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Through you, Mayor, that's the intent.
Okay. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Brand.
I just want to ask about these terms of the lease. These, in my memory, have been the terms that have been discussed for a long. And I'm just wondering whether they can be dealt with in a chamber like this, or whether they need to be gone back into a much bigger, deeper process than us trying to sort of alter things here at the. Just what would be the appropriate approach to dealing with any of these things?
Thank you. Did you hear that, Mr. Carroll?
Through you, Mayor, this has been through a lengthy process, including community engagement, notification. These are the officer's recommendations that we have worked with you on previously. We see no reason to change those.
Any further questions? Councillor Pearl has requested to put it, so we will. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? Don't want to speak to the motion, Councillor Pearl? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak, or will you have an amendment?
I do have an amendment. Sorry, in 3.2, my amendment would be to change the 3 days per week to 5 days per week, maximum.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond? Councillor Gross, would you speak to your amendment?
Okay, so I've spoken to representatives of the school about this, and they cannot use a space for 3 days a week. So their students are having to schlep down to Sandwich, and it's clearly inappropriate. There could be, I think it's time the council got out of the way. If there's a deal to be done, let's not put a fetter on the two community organisations. Let's allow them to make a deal which would be good for the school and good for the Life Saving Club, hopefully, and that would be beneficial for both parties, bringing money to the Life Saving Club and a much needed space for the school.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Bond?
Yes, I think we originally restricted this at 3 days because we wanted this to be a Life Saving Club, not a school building, but we've heard tonight that Life Saving Club doesn't have an issue, and the Life Saving Club is free to negotiate how they feel fit to negotiate with the school for up to 5 days if the Life Saving Club feel that that's workable for them and doesn't interfere with the general business of life saving. And the way I understand the school intends to use this building for some of it is on school educational related life-saving activities, so it meets the needs of both groups.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Brand? Amendment? The amendment?
Oh, hold on, yeah. No, I'll speak to the motion.
Thank you. I will also speak to the amendment, and the reason why I want to support this amendment is not because necessarily of Albert Park College, of which I did exclude myself before from participating in debate, but primarily because I believe the South Melbourne Lifesaving Club needs to have full control over who and when they rent out their premises to. And should it be the school or for a wedding, that should be entirely up to the South Melbourne Lifesaving Club. Their ability to raise funds for what they needed is important. So, in my view, I don't even think we need to put anything in there about the school. But however, at this point in time, I will support the motion because I think it achieves the same thing. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Gross, will put the motion? All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? That amendment has carried, and that now forms a substantive motion. Councillor Brand, you mentioned you wanted to speak to the substantive motion.
Oh yes, I just want to say this is largely a moment of celebration that we're getting on with this, and it's been an incredible process, a difficult process, but we've ended up with, at least physically, an amazing building. I think it's something which has taken everybody by surprise after years and years of fear and loathing. It turned out to be a real gem of a building. A building itself does not make a club. It certainly houses a club, but it's up to the club to see how they take over the building and fit into the building and live their passionate and incredibly complex club life in this sort of very beautiful, simple building. We'll see how it goes, but the maintenance thing is really quite an issue, and I don't know how to handle it. I remember looking back at the old club, and it was such a shocking mishmash of tacked together bits and pieces, everything jammed in and sort of ad hoc, and yet it was a beautiful thing because you could see generations of people making do together in a club. In a sense, they've now got something which is almost complete. It's not completely complete. I know they have to fit out certain things, but the maintenance issue is actually going to be quite a major part of how this club functions. If they get everything done for them, as it has been now, not everything, that's exaggerating, but so much, it bothers me that what is there left for the club to do except just to go and save lives? There's much more to the club than that. Anyway, and maybe the burden of doing all the maintenance is going to be too much, I don't know. But anyway, I hope it's taken up with gusto and the club lives on and lives through its voluntary efforts of fixing up its own place too.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to the substantive motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we'll do one more item before we have a little break. Item 14.6, which is the Australian National Academy of Music, the lease proposal for the South Melbourne Town Hall. And we have, hang on, which ones? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 people that have requested to speak to this. Actually, half of them are statements. So I will ask, first of all, for the people that are here, Miss Adair Bunnett, please. We can hear you quite well. Yes. We're trying to limit people speaking into the changing with the microphone, sir, so that there's no saliva. Thank you. Please come to the end, Ms. Bennett. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. So just to summarise to those people that might be listening online or didn't hear that, Mr. Adair Bennett raises the specific heritage citations that mention individual places and features within the Town Hall, the South Melbourne Town Hall, and raises serious concerns that ANAM's proposal doesn't recognise the specific heritage requirements that are outlined in those citations. For example, they say that they're going to upgrade various things and it doesn't do justice to what is required. And Ms Barnett also mentioned the significant penalties that may be applied to council if that didn't occur. Sorry, I didn't get all of it, but I think I got the gist, hopefully. Ms Carolyn Hutchins, please. Welcome. You could state your name and suburb, please. Thank you. please come to the end. Thank you, Ms Hutchins. Thank you, Ms Hutchins. Okay, just to summarise, Ms Carolyn Hutchins is not in support of the recommendation. She acknowledges it's a very comprehensive report and says there's a number of heritage buildings in the City of Port Phillip that have been adapted to other more modern uses. Queries the $7 million that from insurance that has not been used from the 2018 West Wing roof collapse. Exclaims that the credibility of ANAM is undermined by using quite emotive language through their submission. Asks a question about why the delay in effecting repairs. Concerns that community groups can't find alternative accommodation if they weren't to use the South Melbourne Town Hall building. Is worried about the 50-year lease and queries how many other leases are 50 years that City of Port Phillip's issued, and will not thank the councils if the proposal is supported. Believes that the consultation has been poor, has requested more consultation but hasn't been granted. Okay, we'll move to the next person. Eva Collin, please. Welcome, Ms Collin. Thank you. Please come to the end, Ms Collin. Thank you, Ms Collin. Just summarising, you recommend councillors to support option 1, and that is to postpone, and that there are many other important issues that the council should be focusing on. You believe that the City of Port Phillip has given ANAM many favours over the years, and the rent continues to be subsidised by the City of Port Phillip ratepayers, and in fact still subsidising ANAM. Worried about subletting and taking the proceeds. Also concerned that election promises and the budget, there's a gap there, and the risk that ANAM may not or will not potentially raise the funds that it needs, and it's going to cost more than is budgeted for or anticipated. You're concerned about the reputation. Yeah. Thank you, Ms Collin. Mr Jeff Powers, please. Welcome, Mr Powers. Gowers, was it? G? Thank you. Thank you, Mr Gowers. So the last question was, has Council explored other uses for the South Melbourne Town Hall, in particular around music? You did claim that public space demand is at a premium in the city due to what we've heard tonight, in particular around Albert Park College, the Gasworks, and also Lifesaving Club. And you have given examples of your experience in attending 2 art classes a week at Brighton Town Hall that's been renovated, that has multiple community groups using it, and council use it also for their own art exhibitions, plus it gets commercial rents for weddings, etc. Thank you, Mr Gowers. Mr Michael Sabata, please. Welcome. Mrs. Zabadi, you're going to have to use your big voice today. Thank you, Mr. Zabata. We'll take your email tomorrow on the hygiene side of things. Thank you, Mr. Zabata. Please come to the end. Thank you, Mr. Zabata. Your position is that councillors should adopt the status quo as their resolution. You have stated that your belief is ANAM is a much better negotiator than council. They started at 50, we went to 35, and where we originally started at 15. Council would find many uses if it could be bothered. So to state in the report that it can't is in your view, not justified. The main issue is a panic about cost. You claim the figures are overstated, and you gave numerous examples of that. And you were also concerned about the vague consultation on have you say, and would have preferred council was upfront in exactly what we were asking for from the community, and we would have got a different result. Thank you. And Pam Denton, please. Please stand up. Thank you, Ms Denton. All right, one last thing. Emergency. Thank you, Ms Denton. Thank you. Just a quick summary. You have a petition there that 560 people have signed that share the concerns around the ANAM. You prefer option 1 to decline the offer. You are concerned that we're not looking after the community, which is our primary role. You talk about 50 years being inequitable, considering we looked at the Lifesaving Club only having 5 years. You talked about the school, the high school, also using the town hall, and wouldn't that be lovely? You think ANAM has restricted use of certain areas of the building, for example the chamber. You're a great lover of classical music and have probably see and go to more classical music than any of us, but you encourage council to continue to respect the heritage of the building and the community. Thank you. Now there's a couple of submissions as well. I'm going to be brief. Most of these were also given to the councillors, so the councillors have read them or will read them in their entirety. First up, Nicholas Power. It says, do the elected members of council acknowledge that the results of the Have Your Say campaign may not be truly representative of the community? Many residents did not receive notification of either the ANAM proposal or the Have Your Say campaign due to its brief program of 2 weeks and a lack of advertising. Many only became aware of the proposal via concerned residents who raised the awareness in the issue solely in objection. Jeannie Marsh. I have looked in detail at ANAM's proposal. It provides a once-in-a-generation opportunity to properly upgrade the building for an exciting future ahead. The restored building would provide world-class facilities to match the world-class work that takes place there. I strongly recommend that you support the lease proposal from ANAM for South Melbourne Town Hall. Our local community and our arts community will be enhanced by the improved facilities and continuing outstanding cultural stewardship provided by ANAM. Anita Horvath. I urge Council to support option 2 of the report, being the recommendation to enter into a long-term lease negotiation with ANAM as set out in clause 3, because ANAM is City of Port Phillip's only tertiary education institution of international significance, which helps to bring $3.6 billion into the economy, the City of Port Phillip's economy, which is from a 2013 study. Nick Bailey. With regard to Section 10, key negotiating points of the Council Officers' report, there is nothing here that we see as being problematic, and we are certain that negotiations in good spirit will arrive at a wonderful outcome for the residents of Port Phillip. ANAM's fully funded proposal is for a major transformation of a magnificent building into an iconic and industry-standard cultural and community venue. I have to say, I commend this report to councillors as the start of a tremendously exciting discussion that we cannot wait to begin to enable a once-in-a-generation opportunity to bring some significant funds into this beautiful building and in transforming it into an iconic destination venue, giving it and the Emerald Hill precinct a dynamic and vital life well into the second half of the 21st century. I'm sorry, I'm really cutting these short. Glenn Birmingham. The South Melbourne Town Hall is a community asset. It was taken from the people of South by stealth. The building and the land are owned by the community of ratepayers. The major part of the building was signed away for a peppercorn rental agreement to the National Academy of Music during the period of local councils being controlled by commissioners. Why should the ratepayers of South Melbourne, under the City of Port Phillip, fund a state/federal program in this way? I have nothing against ANAM. However, the community of South Melbourne, Port Phillip should be the beneficiaries of the building. Ideally, from a creative perspective, a series of rooms for artists and similar groups within the community would greatly benefit from a variety of spaces within the building. I urge councillors to vote option number 1, decline the offer. And lastly, Judith Klepner. I call for this matter to be deferred for 12 months and not rejected outright. I would like to hear a response on the consultation process, which would be extraordinary if undertaken by the proponent of a minor planning proposal, let alone a city asset of this nature. Okay. I think we get the gist of all of those. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
Regarding the current financial position of the economy and where we are as a council, what impact does this have on council's contribution in terms of insurance payments, etc., that will be made now and into the future under this contract? Does it change things particularly?
Mr Carroll.
Through you, Mayor, you'll see one of the key negotiation points is the level of contribution being sought from council, and the council's position is that we're seeking to minimise that as much as possible. I just want to clarify, there was some comments earlier around us having received $7 million in insurance. That's not correct. We have budgeted for around $7.5 million for repair works and upgrades. We are yet to get final confirmation of the insurance figure, but we expect that shortly. But that covers a range of works other than the damage. It's also a range of upgrades that are required to the air conditioning system, fire sprinkler systems, etc. as well. But to your point, or through you, Mayor, to Councillor Pearl's point, it'd be something that we'd have to consider very strongly in our negotiation. What we'd be seeking to do is limit any contribution that the council makes while ensuring that the building is looked after over the long term. But we also need to consider the feasibility, viability of the proposal from NM in light of their ability to raise funds and look after the asset as well.
Mr Smith.
Try again. Through you, Madam Mayor. I think the other side of the equation, to answer Councillor Pearl's question, is the ability to attract funding in the current climate. Obviously, all governments of all levels are going to have a significant revenue hit as well as significant cost hits in terms of trying to help the economy recover, at which point they need to inject that stimulus, and we've already seen significant outlays. That will affect, lack of growth will affect GST income for states, so the ability for ANAM to attract funding, I think, is going to be severely impacted. And then the key part of this recommendation is to allow a maximum of 1 year for such negotiations to occur. I think that the change, to answer your question, is going to be in the funding climate that ANAM now find themselves in.
Councillor Gross.
I just wondered if any of the officers could, through you, Madam Mayor, could recall the success of the Assist Centre in the South Melbourne Town Hall. Did it get what sort of visitation?
That's a question for Mr Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have done some numbers on it. I haven't got it off the top of my head tonight, but it's relatively low utilised, and what we find, it's heavily utilised. Much of the use is providing concierge services for community groups that are in the building. And we are doing further reviews of our town hall assist centres, where they're best located, how services are best supported and provided to the community as part of our broader customer experience program at the moment. We would make sure, if we were having to move that centre, that we'd consider carefully a range of different options, how to provide that service into the future. It'll be a key consideration in negotiations.
Thank you.
Councillor Crawford.
Just in reference to some of the heritage issues that were mentioned, obviously as part of the negotiations, those issues could be addressed to ensure that the heritage is kept, the bits that we need, is respected and encouraged. Is that your thinking behind the negotiation?
Mr Savinkov.
Through you, Madam Mayor, any physical change to that building will require very careful consideration, expert advice and ultimately the consent of Heritage Victoria. The building has incredible value and a big part of that is its heritage value.
Councillor Simic.
Thank you. Some very good comments have been made tonight and also received. Some very good comments have been made tonight and also received through some of the submissions we've received over time on this topic. I want to know to what extent this feedback we've received so far will be taken into consideration in any negotiations that take place. And how do we ensure that that happens?
Mrs. Savenclough, did you hear that question properly? Yep. It's a bit echoey back here.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the feedback we've received to date through the Have Your Say and also previous rounds of community consultation has been very valuable to officers in forming up this report, and presumably that will feed into the decision of Council tonight, which will form a framework if the decision is adopted, if the recommendation is adopted, that'll form a framework for negotiations.
Mr. Carroll.
And if I can just add to that through you, Mayor, there's also further consultation planned through the process. Like, this would be the start of a negotiation process, and as the recommendations in the report outline, any future position negotiated with NAB would be subject to a further statutory consultation process with the ability for people to provide further feedback to Council, including submissions through that process.
Thank you. Councillor Brand.
I just want to take up a couple of the questions asked by the members of the public here tonight on financial sorts of things. The valuation of the rental value, the market rental of the town hall in 2015 at $450,000 per annum. I don't think that's a figure that I've seen, but maybe I've missed it. Could I just get a comment on whether that's true?
Thank you. Mrs. Savenclough.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's important with valuations to get recent valuation advice. So our most recent valuation advice, which goes back only a few months, suggests that the market value of the rental value of the property is very significantly higher than $400,000.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Brand.
How does it cost $1 million per annum to run? Briefly, how does it get to that point?
If I could just clarify the question, yep. Through you, Madam Mayor, if I could just clarify that the question was about the $1 million or the approximately $1 million and the components of that. Thank you for the question. The $1 million or approximately so isn't purely about the maintenance of the building. It's also about the renewal of it, its outgoings, the overall cost to council of owning and managing it. And just to continue that one, just to put it in context, the building itself, in terms of its physical nature, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of asset there. So maintaining that, the cost of $1 million to maintain and renew that over its regularly is not, when compared with the overall value, is not that significant.
Thank you. Councillor Brand.
In the research that we've done on comparing it with other town halls that seem to make most of their income from their redundant town halls, so let me call them redundant. I don't mean to be controversial, but semi-redundant town halls costs the money they raise from renting it out and for events and what have you. How are they going, and how would compared to how we would be going if we went with this proposal?
Sorry, Councillor Brand, is that in relation to maintaining the building?
In terms of their income and their outlays. Well, in terms of whether they make their outlays up through to any reasonable extent through finding sort of ad hoc uses rental events and rental and what have you.
Mr Savinkov.
Through you, Madam Mayor, from the evidence we can obtain, including through discussions with some of the officers in those councils managing the buildings, it seems reasonably clear to us that at least most of them are not breaking even.
One last question. If we go into negotiations with ANAM and they, during those negotiations over a year, they discover that they haven't got the funding to do it, or that we discover they haven't got the funding, what happens to us then in that circumstance?
Through you, Madam Mayor, presumably that would close the negotiations. We'd report that outcome to Council.
So, Mr Savinkov, just to take that further, they have a lease currently, and so I assume that they would see that out.
Correct. There's quite a few years left on the remaining lease, from memory 12 years.
Okay, councillors, I'm detecting we're running out of questions. Do we have a mover for the officer's recommendation or something different? Donald? No, that's... Do you want to move an alternative, Councillor Brand?
Okay, I have an alternative recommendation.
Okay, so there's slightly different. If we added another one in, would you please read the added bits to your motion?
The added bits are to 3.3, adding to the items of negotiation identified in the table in section 10 of this report, then including the items added by recommendation 3.4. 3.4 adds to the principal items of negotiation how the tenant's stewardship of this historic building and its heritage fabric is appropriately overseen, and another item, how ongoing use of the building is to be secured for community groups and events. And the last item is now renumbered 3.5.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ross to second. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, my amendment essentially is in support of the substantive motion, but it's an attempt at bolstering it up, making it a stronger document, supporting a stronger negotiation that will, in my view, help us make a decision and make a deal on what I see as a unique opportunity in a way that will address many of the concerns and fears of the people who will feel that they're losing their town hall. I don't believe that forming this relationship with ANAM is actually going to cost the people of South Melbourne their town hall. It'll be in a slightly different form, but it's really important that the essential things that they love and feel and need and desire in our town hall are maintained to a high level, and they include, obviously, a community presence there, a sense that there is a place for the community to continue to be there, even if council itself isn't formally there, and especially that there are the opportunities for community events are strongly there, and that there's community access to so much of what goes on in the town hall. That's one part of it, and the other part of it is the bit that I care about, or that I worry about the most, is the heritage, the conservation management plan, the heritage management of the whole thing, how we as landlords would oversee the treatment of the building, the way it's conserved, the way it's used, along with obviously Heritage Victoria, which has the final authority in that. So this clause is just adding those points very, very explicitly to the long list of points of negotiation, which I think add up to, if they can be achieved, to an answer which I think in the long run will satisfy most of the concerns of the people who can see the downsides that threaten in this deal.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would. I'm just going to throw up a graph of the net present value of the three options. So we have three options. The net present value, you might recall, is the current or present estimated dollar value of an asset, taking into account future cash flows and inflows and outflows. And it tries to look at the time value of money. So option one is the current scenario, and it's almost touching minus $90 million in NPV. This was provided to me by officers, and I really appreciate it. On the other hand, there's quite a few assumptions in this, but it's overwhelming. This council cannot afford to be financially crushed by a decision which would leave us with an asset that's encumbered by its own decrepitude and by its needs as building fabric. This is a completely unromantic approach, but it is absolutely unambiguous about the crushing financial burden if we stick with the current scenario. The second one, which is minus $2.5 million, as you can see, and then the next one, the market rent, is if we make it into a hotel. I think that this is an incredibly dignified outcome for this extraordinary precinct. It's not just the building which is beautiful, it's its place in the landscape, and it's to have a tertiary institution of incredible eminence and international respect would enhance the stature of the building. It's a real opportunity. Otherwise, it's a hotel. And my feeling about the Annam proposal is that it's slightly less remunerative than a market rent. But it is exciting because of the work that our placemaking group is doing on making this precinct a centre for arts. If we lose Annam's ability to raise money, and remember the federal Liberal government promised, what was it, 13 million? 12.5? And then there's going to be a lot of argy-bargy about other governments coming in. We can't look at that level of investment and just turn our backs on it. Now I want to... and adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is what heritage preservation is all about. Adair made some fantastic points, and I know that everyone's disappointed with the level of preservation that we get, but I think David's amended resolution takes that into account and gives real dignity to your suggestions. Eva, you are absolutely right when you said the current rent is a bit of the Yiddish term is it's a mitzvah, it's a blessing. Yeah, I mean, and I was on the council when that Matsia was made, and, well, I just have to say that it's just part of the landscape. You are right, it's a very cheap rental. But at the time, Annam argued about the non-pecuniary benefits for the community in terms of a cultural hub, building the cultural hub, and the presentation of cultural activities for our residents, particularly South Melbourne residents. Mr Gowers made the point about Brighton Town Hall being a community artistic hub. We're talking about this building being an artistic hub, but it is an elite artistic hub, and I think David's amended motion once again takes into account the way the community can be incorporated. So that's why I'm happy to second it. And we've had a lot of great and persuasive presentations, but in the end, this beautiful, historic, wonderful place deserves an august and eminent tenant, which is the basis on which we can build that artistic precinct for the wealth, both cultural and economic, of the whole community. So this is just an invitation to converse. I don't know what the end result will be, but I want to give our officers who have been great on this to an opportunity to have that conversation for the benefit of both the council, coffers and the whole community.
Councillor Gross, thank you. Councillor Crawford.
So art is about seeing the possibilities, and I think that's what I see tonight. The South Melbourne Town Hall, as well, it already has established itself as a centre of our municipality as a hub for art. Now, I got onto council making sure art was on the agenda, and we have an art strategy, a proper art strategy, and it is all about building and supporting our creative industries, which in the current paradigm have completely lost everything. Their whole ability to earn money has shut down overnight, and it's terrifying. And yet we still have this possibility of the town hall being something wonderful in our community and offering benefits to our community. And I think that now is the time to take that opportunity, that possibility by both hands and see where it goes. There is so much changing, but it would be foolish to throw this possibility out without considering it and seeing where it goes. You know, I'm also very aware we are lucky to be a municipality that has 3 major town halls, but they cost a lot to upkeep. And we have lots of community centres which provide all sorts of things, like art programs for locals. So our facilities, our town halls are underutilised, and that is a problem, and as we see in that report, evident in many town halls. So I want to see our spaces used and regarded, and if someone wants to be there and be part of keeping our reputation as a creative hub of Melbourne, the municipality where the arts happens, and they want to find and fight for funding to put money into it to keep this building in good nick, I am open to that possibility. Now, I also represent Elwood and Ripon Lee, and we don't have a town hall, but we share in the other 3, and we're really grateful for that. But I also have a responsibility, and I hadn't seen Councillor Gross's chart before. Elwood residents, and actually the whole municipality, is faced with many things, but flooding and is a future that may descend upon us by the end of this century. And I think that 19 million could be better used to help our residents not flood their beautiful homes and feel safe. There are many other things that money could be put to, as well as also having an amazing artistic hub by a company that's passionate about staying in the area. If this was Paris or London, they wouldn't be arguing to have an elite group stay in their municipality. They'd be embracing it. So I hear your concerns. I think we can manage them all. But I am very interested in seeing where this is possibly going to take us and maintaining the City of Port Phillip's reputation as one of the creative hubs of Melbourne. So I'm very much in support of this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Simic.
Thank you. We've kind of come to another issue tonight where there are some very different views in our community, and as there should be, because we need to take all of our facilities seriously and think about any use of the facility very seriously. I don't agree with the argument that council couldn't afford to fix aspects of the building in order to make the building usable without the help of NAM. I agree that it's important for us to keep the building open to community as much as possible and to allow for community space. I'm heartened by the example around art classes taking place and want to ensure that there are opportunities for art class to happen in our municipality. And indeed, I know that many of our buildings are used by different groups, dance studios, yoga studios, all sorts of community. Somebody thinks it's time for us to go home. I don't disagree. Many of our buildings are used in different ways across the municipality. One of the things that I like about NAM being in the South Melbourne Town Hall is whenever I walk into that building and whenever I walk around the municipality, I see young people buzzing around. Quite often when we've had meetings at the South Melbourne Town Hall, the sound of music emanating from some of the rooms is actually a really pleasing thing, and I am quite pleased that that is happening in our municipality. So we do need to balance the way that we use our spaces. I am very much drawn to many of the arguments that have been made by people tonight, but I also want to point out that we are actually not making a decision on whether we're going to go ahead or not tonight. We are engaging in a very long process where, as has been said, a conversation is going to take place. And at the end of that conversation, it's going to be up to us, and again, up to the community to give input into whether we pursue a relationship or not. There are so many instances where this can also fall down, and NAM's proposal is relying on a large amount of sum coming from the federal and state government, and Councillor Pearl's question around the financial viability in the scheme of what's happening is a good one. So while I know that many people are not ultimately supportive of the proposal that NAM's put tonight, Council also hasn't agreed to that proposal. And as was responded to in the questions that I asked, there is an opportunity for the feedback that the community has put to be taken into consideration in the negotiations. And I trust that officers will do that work as best as they can. At the end of it all, we are going to be sitting together again, hopefully under much better circumstances, hopefully a bit closer to each other as life turns back to normal, or whatever the new normal will look like. But we will get to make that decision together. Throughout this process, again, we've had lots of people with very different views contact us as councillors, very opposing views, and I put myself forward to remain open to any conversations with anyone in the community that wants to have around this. And certainly if you send us an email, even when we don't necessarily respond, we still read your emails. So please keep talking to us.
Thank you,
Thank you
Councillor
for coming
Simic.
tonight.
Councillor Pearl.
Yeah, councillors, I'm urging you to vote against this, and I'm not asking you to vote against the proposal, and I don't want people out there thinking I'm against the proposal. I'm not necessarily, and those of you would know I had a very small but important role to play in some of that money that has been committed to the project. But the reason I'm asking you to do this, and I'll foreshadow if this does fail, I'll put a motion to defer this to a future council meeting, is at this time, given our budget position and the footing the council needs to be on, I want those officers that are currently very key people that would be working on this, working on revising our budget situation and ensuring that we're allocating these resources and other resources to critical services that will be required in the next 12 months based on the situation that we're currently facing. That's more important in the next 3 to 6 months than working on this decision here, which frankly I don't think is going to get surety around funding from the state government and has a very low likelihood on my primitive assessment of actually getting up based on what's happened in financial markets and the general society in the past 3 weeks. We need to ensure that our resources are very acutely focused on our core service provision in the next 3 months and not focusing on negotiations such as these. That's not a reflection on the proposal from ANAM. I also think they need the opportunity to come and sit here in a safe environment in a council meeting and put their best foot forward. I voted against a previous lease for ANAM, as these people here would probably remember, on the basis I didn't think they were fully engaged in the process. I don't accuse them of the same thing if they're watching at home tonight, because they're probably putting their personal safety first than coming to this council meeting here this evening. But I would advise you that the sensible thing to do, given the current situation that we're in, and the prudent thing to do would be vote this down, and then let's put a motion forward to defer the item and come back when we have better surety on our resources, both human and financial, and secondly when AMAN can actually come and sit in the meeting and answer questions from councillors regarding the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak to them? Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. I just hope the ratepayers at Port Phillip weren't at home looking at that slide Councillor Gross put up, because the current situation scenario, should we choose that, would have them rolling around on the floor, currently suffering central chest pain. That was quite telling, that graph, and it's a good indication of everyone of the position we're in with our town halls. Embedding ANAM in South Melbourne is a good outcome. In fact, it's probably a very good outcome. It's not perfect. There are some issues, but it is a very good outcome. Melbourne's full of old town halls that sit empty and cost plenty to the councils that are in possession of them. We've seen that by doing this half-hearted, it doesn't get the best outcome, as evidenced by what happened at South Melbourne Town Hall with the collapse of the roof through it was an undiscovered and unknown building fault that quite frankly could have been very serious. It could have caused a very serious injury, or even worse, for anyone who's been up and had a look at what happened or the outcome after the roof collapse. We still own the town hall. We're not giving it away. We're just renting it out. The ownership of the town hall does not change here. We're just negotiating a lease that hopefully delivers a very good outcome for council and a very good outcome for ANAM, and a very good outcome for South Melbourne, for those of you who I know are really passionate about that particular area. Having a world-class music facility in South Melbourne is good for South Melbourne. There is a chance we could lose this if we don't negotiate with them in good faith, and that's what I think here at council we should be doing.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand, would you like to close?
Thank you very much. As Councillor Bond says, there are town halls all over Melbourne. There are churches. There are buildings which are our best architecture, our most spiritual architecture. Maybe VFL footy grounds, but there are places that we treasure in our culture that are no longer able to fulfil their traditional use. Just through the force of circumstances, things have gone. And it is so hard. We can see with churches, with disappearing congregations, what do you do with the church? You sell it and you make apartments in it, or you turn it into some business or whatever, or you need to find something that's going to work there. It's really, really hard. It's the same with all of the town halls. They're all sitting there with desultory sort of rug sales. We had a boxing match in here. Pardon? Computer swap meets. It is really difficult. The things that we want to use them for do not pay their way. It's a huge financial burden to be providing a small amount of community space in the building. I think we need to provide community space. It doesn't have to be in this particular way, and I think we can combine that in this case. It's an opportunity which is like, it's too good an opportunity to lose. This is like a marriage made in heaven, to actually find a really incredible cultural institution, not a commercial business or an exclusive hotel or anything like that. An institution which is a cultural institution. It's an educational institution. It produces the most beautiful stuff. This is the most important heritage building we have in the whole city. It has beautiful acoustics. It's a glorious place. It's a magnificent presence. I cannot think of a better use of it than a national level music school which needs audiences for its existence, that needs to bring audiences in to hear it. It's such a good marriage. We need to take this opportunity. We really can't let it go. It's something, but the trouble is, it actually does have to work for us. Not every marriage is going to work, but we need to make it work, or we need to find out whether it'll work. It is simply not an opportunity to be rejected because it might not work. And that's what we're sort of looking at here. We need to give it a go and explore it and find out. And that may be painful in certain ways, but I think it'll be a once-off brilliant victory if it works. And that's what this 12 months is here. We're setting before us to see if it will work when we go through all of the things that we actually need, the things that matter to us, to see whether they can be achieved, the things that matter to Anam, of course, to see whether they really can be achieved. Maybe it's like an engagement, I don't know. Maybe I won't go down that track. Councillor Pearl has said, well, maybe it's not the best time to do it. I think that falls into the category of, well, maybe we can't make it work, so we shouldn't do it now.
Point of order, that's not what I said at all.
I'm inferring that's what you said.
Sorry.
Yeah, point of order, don't infer what I say, just quote what I say.
What is your reason?
My reasoning is I've been misrepresented.
Misrepresented?
Under the standing orders, I can't remember what section it is.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Can you please address any questions through me, Councillor Pearl?
Sorry?
Councillor Brand, I'm just saying, would Councillor Pearl please address any issues he has through me? Councillor Brand, please continue.
If we're going to have difficulty negotiating this, and Anam will be facing difficulties too, I'm sure at some point, if it becomes impossible to manage due to worsening situation with the virus, the pandemic, I'm sure it can be called off at mutual if it needs to be. But we need to make it work. And I just want to talk just a moment about the heritage issues, which I think are, to me, probably the most concerning to me, because I don't think they've been addressed all that well. I think that Anam has had a fantastic record with the cultural product it produces in this place. It probably hasn't had as good a record with its stewardship of the heritage so far. It's something which we need to look at, and it's something which wasn't probably in the report sort of really brought out to the fore. It is a really difficult thing to do, to convert a building like this with so much precious fine fabric, not just the overall building, but all of the timber panellings, the honour boards, the details, the objects that are still there from the past. It's really, really hard to do. But if we look at, and especially to fit it out into the modern needs of a modern school and a modern concert hall and what have you, we agree entirely with Adair Bunnett that this is like really, how do you do it? It's difficult. But you can see it in music, in opera houses, concert halls, town halls through Europe. the most brilliant architectural adaptations. And this is how these buildings are maintained as brilliant buildings in our culture, in our heritage. And it's a place where, and you have an organisation like ANAM which has the capacity to do that. Well, I think we've just got to go through it hard and try and make this work. And if it doesn't work through all of these points of negotiation, they need to be tested. If it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. But at least we've given it a go. So I'm afraid that's my philosophy towards why I'm landing on this side of the divide. I hope that this side of it is actually a workable side for everybody else that feels the other way.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brand. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion has been carried. Now, we've all been sitting here 3 hours, so we're just going to have a quick break. 5 minutes, councillors. Just like to thank the community for sitting through all of that time. Thank you. Back at 9:50. It'll be 14.2, which is the notice of intention to lease Decanters by the Bay, 174 Nott Street, Port Melbourne. Councillors, we don't have any members of the community that have registered to speak. So, Councillor Pearl, you want to move that. Councillor Gross to second. Do I have any speakers? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Move to item 14.3, which is the proposed tenancy agreements for Eildon Road Children's Centre Incorporated, the Avenue Children's Centre Incorporated and the Elwood Children's Centre Incorporated. Again, no speakers. Councillors, do I have any questions? Councillor Crawford, would you like to move? Yes. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. Would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 14.4, which is the investment and the management policy. Any questions? Councillors? Good. Then do I have a mover? Councillor Crawford to move. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? Anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Oh, Councillor Copsey, you wanted to speak, all right.
I will keep it brief. I think this is a really relevant policy to some of the points that were raised tonight. I just wanted to state for the record, part of this policy is our benchmarks for fossil fuel free investment targets and performance benchmarks. I would personally like to see these being increased higher, but I do note that we consistently are achieving above benchmark in practice. So just wanted to state that, and I'm pleased to see that we review this policy regularly and can update it based on changing times.
Thank you. So I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. 14.5, Assemblies of Councillors. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Gross to move. Councillor Pearl to second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. We've already done 14.6, so we'll move to 14.7, which is Placemaking CEO Delegation Report. Any questions, councillors? Then I'll ask for a mover for that. Councillor Pearl to move. Councillor Crawford to second. Any speakers? Then I'll put that. All those in favour? That's carried. Carried. Now we'll go to the two late reports that I mentioned earlier, being the first one being service levels for COVID-19. All right. The CEO has requested. The CEO has requested that we reverse the order and we'll do the operational update first for COVID-19. I'm comfortable with that. Councillors, any questions? Just, Mr. Smith, can you give a quick update on what this is about, please?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, the reason I asked to have this first is because it talks about the service level assessments, the first tranche of which are in the next report. So I think this gives context to the community in terms of the wider response that we are undertaking. I won't read the report in full, I'll just summarise it for you. Our two priorities have been an absolute focus since we enacted our pandemic sub-plan on the 2nd of March, have been to keep the community safe and to, secondly, keep councillors and staff safe. The two are not unrelated, as we need to keep staff safe so that we can continue to provide vital services and essential services to assist our community in this time of great need. We have, the report details a summary of the actions that we've been undertaking within my administration to enact and update our sub-plan since the coronavirus outbreak. This has included updating all of our business continuity plans, which in effect triage services into essential and normally essential, but in these times discretionary services, putting community wellbeing and health at the forefront of that triaging process and thinking about the roles we have to play in this time of state emergency relative to the state authorities and the Commonwealth authorities. It's been an incredibly fast-moving situation, and I acknowledged earlier the need to get more information out to our community. There have been regular hotspots updates on our website for the community, and I encourage the community to keep looking at the website because that's where they'll find the most relevant and up-to-date information as the information changes daily. I know, Madam Mayor, you made some media statements yesterday which are incredibly helpful, I think, in keeping our community informed. And this report tonight is an attempt to provide further information to the community. Importantly, we are at, I think, the beginning of a fast accelerating growth curve in terms of the pandemic that we're facing. We heard again from the Prime Minister this morning some additional controls. As I said, it's a fast-moving situation, and we are trying as a council and for our community to do whatever we can to assist state and Commonwealth authorities to flatten that curve. Most members of our community would have heard the Prime Minister address the nation this morning and introducing further measures. And last week there were some economic stimulus packages raised. Of particular interest, I think, is the South Melbourne market. There was media last week that there was some confirmed cases on the weekend prior, both on the Friday and at the Mussels and Jazz Festival. We worked very carefully with the state authorities to get clear advice in keeping that market open. The market itself is a vital fresh food supply for our community, and we've received advice to keep that open. And again, in the Prime Minister's statements and in National Health Advice this morning, they were talking about the importance of keeping food markets open. We have introduced extra controls there, including extra cleaning and disinfection procedures, and we continue to monitor numbers to make sure it is safe for crowds to shop there at this time when people need to get a good supply of fresh food. Again, like our other services, we are looking to scenarios where there may be increased social distancing controls. So the market will shortly announce a click and collect service in the York Street car park. We've been working on that for a few weeks to try and make sure that can be done safely. But I think people being able to drive up and order their groceries and pick up their fresh food is a vital community service, and we continue with plans there to expand digital online ordering and delivery. That's been a little bit harder to stack up, but we're working hard to try and keep the market open. Our local businesses are at the forefront of our thoughts. The federal government announced some help. I have had direct contact with two of the trader groups and through my staff with another trader group. I'm meeting with and talking to the Acland Street Trader Group on Friday. The news is not good for our small businesses. Some are losing 30 to 40%, particularly in areas like Fitzroy Street, where we have a lot of hospitality venues with new rules around events of 100 people or less. Venues I know, like the Prince and the Espy, have had significant cancellations and decline in business. And our smaller retail and hospitality businesses are struggling. The same in Port Melbourne, where I spoke to the Port Melbourne Business Traders Association. And so at this stage we are gathering information. They're sharing that information very frankly with us. I know the City of Melbourne introduced a package yesterday of assistance. Our view is that we should open up very strong lines of communication with small businesses and understand what federal and state assistance is available. It's worth noting for councillors in our community that we are also in many ways a business, and our own revenue will take a significant hit, and we're already working on some financial scenarios to consider what that means in terms of priorities for this council's next budget, but also more importantly in the long term, how this council needs to position itself to deal with a financial situation where many people and businesses in our community we believe are going to be greatly impacted. In terms of service levels, which is the next report, we have undertaken a number of service-based risk assessments based on federal and state health guidelines, and as I said, that's been changing daily. The next report tonight is the first tranche of those, where we are recommending either closure or reduction of a number of council services and programs based on public health risk assessment, but also based on the need to continue services where we possibly can. But also in those reports you will see that, like the South Melbourne market, we have examined ways to move those components of those services into digital and online environments so that where we can keep service levels up through those channels to our community. Finally, I'd say that obviously as the CEO of a fairly large organisation in the City of Port Phillip, I have specific health and safety obligations, not just to staff but to councillors, hence the changes in meeting procedures tonight. And in terms of staff, one of my priorities, they, like every member of our community, are also community members and family members and have natural anxieties. One of the things I've undertaken to do for staff is make sure that we have very clear lines of information and we keep them well informed. But we're also moving rapidly to move many of our staff into working from home situations and putting non-essential staff into environments where they are going to be much safer. In terms of essential services, we have been and are about to enact strategies where we split locations between essential services so that in the event that we have to isolate staff members, that we minimise the other staff that we have to then isolate. And the isolation may be because they become infected with the virus, or they are required under other guidelines to isolate. So by splitting staff, allowing staff to work from home, making sure that key personnel minimise face-to-face contact, including the executive, which is why you'll see less of the executive here tonight and just coming in for certain items. That allows us to continue to operate as an organisation. So I will continue to provide these reports through to councillors. I'm sure the Mayor will continue to make media statements, and I'd encourage the community to access our website to update themselves on what council is doing to both keep the community safe and to keep our staff safe so that we can continue to provide services to the community that we care so much about. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Smith. So, does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, CEO, for all the work that you're doing and for all of the officers. I know that this is a very difficult time, and I know you're working very long hours, very unprecedented, but thank you for all your work.
Do you have a question?
Yes. My question is, you've talked about some of the services and the next report also talks about some of the services specifically. There's some services that...
Councillor Simic, we're actually on the CEO report, not the services report. I'm just... On the CEO report.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is about our response to some of the homelessness services, how we're looking after our elderly community, and also our childcare services. Your report talks about some of the work that we're doing, but it doesn't touch on those specifically. Neither does the second report. So I think it'd be good to update on that.
Mr Keenan.
Through you, Mayor. So I'll take that in two parts. The homelessness services, which we provide, are fairly small. A couple of outreach services, we've deemed those to be essential, and we will continue those. And we're working through, there's probably about 60 individual service programs, but we're clumping them together in terms of doing this risk mitigation into clusters. We've done the most pressing ones firstly. The outreach services we can continue to run pretty easily and safely in terms of staff safety. The childcare services are a complex one in that they've been deemed essential services by the Prime Minister. And they will be keeping going, and I assume at some point if they close, they'll close immediately. So with the childcare services, they are continuing, and we're monitoring, and the CEO referred to the business continuity plans. We're modelling the impact of a loss of X% of staff, Y% of staff, at a point where we might need to close down one centre and then reallocate families across another. So we're monitoring that. Children's centres is a significant workforce in terms of numbers. At the moment, we have our absenteeism. There's not a big loss in terms of sickness at the minute. But that will be one that will be in some parts out of our hands, as will maternal and child health services.
Thank you, Mr Keenan. Councillor Simic?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question about the council meetings themselves, and obviously we've changed meeting procedure tonight already, but what steps are being taken to move council's meetings to online, still allowing for community participation where possible? And if, as I understand under the Local Government Act, that's not possible currently, what work do we need to do to advocate effectively for a change?
Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, currently the Local Government Act and the Local Government Act that was passed in Parliament recently doesn't provide for the ability to conduct meetings of council electronically. Certainly a number of inner metropolitan councils are advocating strongly to the Minister for Local Government, as well as through peak body representatives, to seek urgent change to enable this very practical measure to be put in place.
Thank you, Mr Smith.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to add a little bit more information to that, tonight we had an urgent motion to change our meeting procedures to allow the public to lodge questions online. We have received late advice this evening that we will be able to meet not in public, but that still doesn't help us to meet digitally. So to protect the community, we've received some advice that we will be able to meet without the public present. And certainly once the new Act comes into force, that would be under, I think, what's called the security provisions of that Act, where a council is allowed to meet not in public. And that would again be based on an assessment of the need to do that in terms of community health and wellbeing. We are still advocating to be able to allow councillors to meet digitally.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, CEO, for this report, and to the staff who are working so hard to deal with current circumstances. Just in relation to 3.20, this talks about the measures we're taking to protect councillors and officers by limiting public attendance at meetings at the moment. Firstly, I think it would be true to say that it's also to protect community that we're taking that step. So just a comment in relation to that. And a question about, obviously we'll have learnings from tonight. It's a very new situation we find ourselves in, but I take it staff will learn from some of the audio and distancing difficulties we've had tonight, and do we propose to do things a little differently in future, I suppose, is my question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, absolutely. This obviously was put together quite hurriedly, given the escalation in risk, and we will learn and continue to learn how we can do these things better and keep democracy open as best we can.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, we've got an officer's recommendation to receive and note the report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Pearl. Councillor Brand a second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just quickly to say that fear is the enemy of hope in many respects, and there's a lot of scary things going on at the moment. The truth is, yes, watching a virus like this spread is uneasy at best, and it makes people very, very fearful. And our hearts and my heart goes out to those that have been devastated by coronavirus. But we shouldn't let the concern turn into anxiety and panic. We will get through this. And as long as we focus on the hope of every single day rather than the fear of what could or may or may not happen tomorrow, we'll get through this together. It's a difficult time. Our country and our council has faced difficult times before. But if we make wise decisions now and we protect each other and we work together as a team, I'm very sure that hope will prevail any fear that we are currently facing at the moment. And things will get back to normal faster than we think if we work together. So this council is at its best when we're focused on one thing and working together. And I hope as a team over the coming days, weeks and months that we as a council group live up to that aspiration and outperform for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Brand?
Yes, I wanted to say a similar thing, but just like every household and every business and every institution in Australia, we're facing just terrible decisions, difficult decisions to be made every day, increasingly difficult, and we're doing it really hard. And it's a especially difficult one for us because I think the thing that is going to get us through the whole crisis is a sense of community, a sense of acting together with a sense of community rather than the hoarding phenomenon of every person for themselves. And the council, in so many ways, represents the community. So the essential services that council provides are essential to that community. We will learn more and more about how essential they are, but also every time we do something in the community, it is actually endangering them as well because of the contacts and what have you. It's going to be an incredible ride just to see how that equation works out, and everybody will be doing their utmost, and it'll be devastating at times, I think, and also really powerful and uplifting, and we'll see the best and the worst, and I hope I'm sure council is going to be really in the best category there. I think we're doing well so far, and that's our challenge.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the other late report, which is around the services, the interim variation to council service levels in relation to COVID-19. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Copsey.
Sorry if this is a dumb one. I was actually just wondering if officers could be a bit more specific about 3.3, the arts and creative industries art and heritage programs and what those entail.
Mr Keenan.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. They're fairly small programs. They're heritage walks. They're sort of one-off events during the day. It's a heritage walk and another similar program that they were coming up pretty soon. So that's why this one got pushed up the line. It's a fairly small program. It does tend to attract older people, so a cohort that's at higher risk. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question, probably of you, Mr Keenan, in relation to the suggestion that our libraries are closed down as of tonight. Many of our vulnerable, in particular, use the libraries for a lot of different things, in particular being able to access the internet, amongst other things. You talked about some of the service provision earlier, but what are we doing to make sure that that cohort remains connected?
Through you, Mayor. So over the next couple of days, the library staff are working as to how they can continue to provide service with the libraries closed, and that will be front of mind. One option that we can look at is there's Wi-Fi access outside the library, which is possible, but that assumes that people will have laptops or tablets, which they won't. We'll be looking at ways to see whether it is possible to safely provide access. We're not sure how we might do that, and we haven't come up with that yet.
Thank you. Mr Keenan, what I've heard a lot from various members of our community about our council communications is the worry around what's happening to our most vulnerable at this point in time. What communications are we going to be doing to make people feel comfortable that we're taking their most vulnerable and most at risk seriously in this time?
Through you, Bear. I think that's at front of mind, and I think the most obvious example is that the highest risk program to staff and clients we're electing to deem essential and continuing to run.
I guess just a short that a little. I know that that's what we're doing. How does the community know? How are we going to communicate that so they feel comfortable?
Our priority has been to communicate with clients in the first instance. We'll work with the communications team to communicate more broadly to the community, but our first priority is to communicate directly with clients affected.
Mr. CEO, yep.
So, through you, Madam Mayor, our media team and comms team are aware of the recommendations that we're making tonight. They are lined up to make communications and media statements tomorrow in the morning, pending your decision. We will have signage on, for example, the libraries in the morning, so if people do turn up. I will explore with Mr. Keenan whether that signage can do something other than, sorry, the library's closed. I think the point you're raising is a good one. I'll take that on notice and see if we can use that signage to also point people to forms of assistance, because they won't, if they can't get on the internet, they can't access their website. So we'll do what we can to get some good communication out on the ground in front of our libraries in the morning. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? If not, I'm going to move this report. Do I have a seconder? Yep. Councillor Pearl to second. I'm going to briefly speak to it as well, and I'd just like to say that I'm really calling on everyone in the whole community to be safe and to be kind to each other. First and foremost, we've seen some very poor behaviour of our community, unfortunately, but we're seeing what the really acute ends of what's happening in our community. The very, very good and also the very bad. COVID-19 is going to be here for quite a while, and so we're learning as fast as we can here as councillors here in the organisation, as you've heard already. Rapid changes. You'll be not seeing any events going on, service reductions such as our libraries, such as community food programs, support programs, potentially the St Kilda Film Festival, the St Kilda Esplanade Market, etc. But it's all about, as I've learnt recently, the whole action learning. We're going to be trying to be agile and do things on the fly a lot more. My heart goes out to all those that may be unwell. But I am, like many of the councillors here, extremely hopeful that we'll all pull together and limit the contagion. In the meantime, let's call on our sense of community and look after each other. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like? Councillor Crawford.
I'm feeling very helpless right now, and I just wanted to, not that anyone's necessarily listening right now, we have a new cohort of people at risk in our community, and they are all the casual hospitality workers, which makes up a large population of the people that live in our flats, and also to the artistic community who have no way of making money. And now that's a different group of people that we've ever had to consider before, and I guess at this level of government we actually probably don't have the capacity to help them in the way. And so I am actually urging other levels of government please to step up, because these people are at risk of homelessness, are at risk of not being able to afford food, and their ability to earn money is a long way off. You know, if COVID's with us for 6 months to a year, those people have no capacity. So I am urging the other levels of government, because I, as a councillor, am not able to do anything right now, to please find a way to support these people properly. I don't know, whatever the form it is, the UBI, whatever, but please step up, because there is a whole new people at risk, and it's people, a lot of them live in our municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like? Councillor Bond?
Yeah, also, I guess on a similar type theme, we have a lot of people who make a living out of places like the Esplanade Market. And if we were to, or if that was to have to close at some point in time, once again, it's 80, 90 businesses, people, households that no longer have income coming in. So I think it's important we keep these places open as long as we can. Obviously, it comes to a point where we will have no choice but to shut them, but I think at this point in time it's an outdoor market. It's probably very low risk. The people are not all huddled together So I think, yeah, it'd be good for it to continue to give people an income for another however long we get. Hopefully it doesn't have to close, but another few weeks worth of income for these people will make a significant difference to their lives.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Copsey.
Well spoken, councillors so far. I think it's a really difficult time for everyone, for people who find themselves in a position where we have challenges that none of us probably anticipated prior to coming on here, and that I think that the rapidity of the changes is unsettling for everyone within the community as well. We share the concern, but we also, I think, are really taking note of the amazing things that are happening at community level, the level of concern demonstrated by people getting in touch who are worried about people in the community who may be more exposed or vulnerable, I'm finding really heartening. So we're already seeing big changes, and no doubt there will be lots of big changes to come, but I think we're all very committed to working together to make the most sensible and evidence-based decisions that we can to protect our community and to make sure that as we emerge on the other side of this, which we will, that we learn some things along the way, and hopefully that we take the opportunity to grow stronger as a community. I hope that's what we can get out of all of this.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. No other speakers? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay, now we're up to item 15, which is notices of motion. And councillors, we don't have any notices of motion tonight. Item 16 is reports by councillor delegates. Do we have any reports tonight? There are none. Item 17 is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business? Then I'll move to item 18, which is confidential matters, and we've got two items of confidential items tonight, being 18.1, Water Sensitive Cities Strategy, and 18.2, which is the St Kilda Marina Project, Stage 1, the Evaluation Panel Report for endorsement. I'd like to call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to the members of the public. Councillor Pearl to move, Councillor Bond to second, so the meeting be closed in accordance with section 89(2)(d) of the Local Government Act 1989. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried.